As an 18-year-old, I sat myself down after going through high school and said, I really want to be part of the biggest industry in Australia. What is it? And at that stage, it was mining. I was also very lucky to be one of the first females in industry to do it. At that stage, oil and gas started to boom. So I swapped industries and was very lucky to get picked up by Woodside and flown off to an FPSO. And I remember going on board, taking my first helicopter training, taking that first helicopter flight, getting on board and just realizing this is what I wanted to do. Like, this was my jam. The control room, the activity, the engineering behind even making an offshore floating facility. I fell in love with an FPSO the day I got on it. And I realized that was what I was supposed to be in life. It was super interesting for me from day one. And I think that's why, even to this day, I love it.
I'm Matt Nicholson, and today on Engineering Pro, we'll be talking to Jayne Arlidge, a digital innovator and advisor, about her impressive 39-year career in the oil and gas sector. Jayne began her career at 18 as a maintenance engineer on a floating production, storage and offloading vessel. She progressed to become a principal in instrumentation, alarm management and automation for deepwater assets at one of the world's largest petrochemical companies. In the first part of this two-part podcast, we'll delve into Jayne's career journey and explore how her eagerness to learn, grow and seize every opportunity contributed to her remarkable success. We'll discuss life on an FPSO, health and safety considerations, and some of the challenges and highlights of offshore living. Hi Jayne, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi Matt.
So just jumping back to the start then, is how did you get started in your career?
How did I even get started? Right, so in a galaxy far, far away, because it was a long, long time ago, as an 18-year-old, I sat myself down after going through high school and said, I really want to be part of the biggest industry in Australia. What is it? And at that stage, it was mining. Oil and gas wasn't the biggest at that stage. So I managed to get through a set of interview processes. I talked to a lot of my friends that were also in the industry, and they were saying, look, instrumentation, this is what it does. It was very appealing to my STEM mindset. And the apprenticeships were starting to get offered. So I got very lucky and was offered an apprenticeship. In those days, 30 plus years ago, I was also very lucky to be one of the first females in industry to do it. I didn't take it lightly, threw myself at it, and over the course of 4 years, when it came to the final exams, I topped Western Australia, I came second in Australia, and at that stage, oil and gas started to boom. So I swapped industries and was very lucky to get picked up by Woodside and flown off to an FPSO. Funnily enough, that FPSO was an SBM FPSO, the Cossack Pioneer. And I remember going on board, taking my first helicopter training, taking that first helicopter flight, getting on board the Cossack Pioneer and just realizing this is what I wanted to do. Like, this was my jam. The control room, the activity, the engineering behind even making an offshore floating facility that's basically a giant petrol station in the middle of the ocean. So you're hundreds of miles away from anywhere. And that incredible journey started off then. Being an instrumentation technician then turned into automation, more controls. And as industry and technology changed, that was a very good dovetail fit for me. But yeah, I fell in love with an FPSO the day I got on it. And I realized that was what I was supposed to be in life. 30 plus years later, that was the story.
So was an FPSO, was it something that you were aware of before you started? Or were you interested in engineering and kind of found that and realized, yes, this is where I want to be?
That's a good question. I don't know any 18-year-old that actually knows what an FPSO is, a floating production storage offtake facility, or really what an offshore rig does. Other than obviously the last 10 years, you've seen the movies of Deepwater Horizon, so people are more aware. But for me, it was definitely that mindset of, I really enjoyed maths and science growing up through my high school. When I started my apprenticeship up, I realized that the whole world revolves around instruments. I mean, you're in your car, it makes an alarm, you pull over. It's the same as what an FPSO does in the world that I'm in, is that it's very driven by alarms. It's very driven by monitoring and verifying what that piece of facility is doing or what that piece of equipment's doing. So I found it fascinating. That once I realized what the power of what instrumentation and control system does, it's all around you constantly. So yeah, it was super interesting for me from day one. And I think that's why even to this day, I love it.
Yeah.
Like, love it. Yeah.
Brilliant. So we've looked at the start of your career then, and how you got into FPSOs. How did that progress to the point where you were a principal of instrumentation? How did you get there?
Again, great question. And again, that goes back to a long, long time ago. So after I'd done the apprenticeship and gone on to my first FPSO and realised I was totally in awe of them, the oil price itself had come up. And so they were looking for a lot of people to start going into the overseas part of building FPSOs. So I'd been on to one that was running, and now this next part of my career happened, which is very early 20s, was the opportunity to go to Singapore. And so it's my first expat overseas assignment, very close to Western Australia. So a group of us went there and we started building FPSOs. So one part of being on an FPSO is watching it all together work, then going at a very early phase in my life, watching the modules get built to build one. Another humbling and extremely rewarding part of my career. And really it took off from there. So I spent a lot of time in construction yards, a lot of time in the front-end engineering, the design to get the modules where they should be. And then ended up meeting ExxonMobil. I was in a shipyard in South Korea. And the vice president at the time said, what will it take to get you to come to Russia? You're on these modules in South Korea. And so, I gave him a list of criteria, and the next thing I know, I'm in Russia, I'm working for the company. 7.5 years later, got sent to headquarters, Houston, Texas, then back out to West Africa, and then Guyana. So it really snowballed from that minute on. But I've been very lucky in my career to have experienced maintenance, operations, construction, detailed engineering. I always knew that I was surrounded by people that wouldn't ask me to go and do something if it wasn't, for the better of Jayne and for the better of the company. So I always had this yes mindset. And that's probably, I'd say, if there was a superpower, it's to be able to say yes to absolutely everything and then think about it later.
That's how the best opportunities appear, though, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the forefront. It's the leading edge of technology in the world. So you get to see all of that as well. I mean, I consider myself lucky every day.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's a really good mindset for other people to take on board in terms of taking opportunities, and there's confidence and having the confidence to rely on a support network as well of people who will 100%. Obviously help you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So just thinking a little bit more about the kind of the day-to-day stuff, really. What was the day-to-day life on an FPSO actually like once you were there and working?
So a day would start off very early in the morning, getting picked up at probably 4 o'clock from your accommodation on land, to going to the helicopter place where the helicopters take you. So there's a debriefing. So again, you're going back to very much safety is the forefront of what you do. So even from the minute you wake up, how you've packed your bag safely, making sure that it's got the right things in it and not the wrong things, getting on the helicopter, putting your helicopter underwater escape training mindset to play, getting on the helicopter, being present, making sure you remember all the things that you were taught in your training, and then landing. So the helicopter flight in itself, that's how the day starts. So you're pretty switched on at this stage. You get on board, you do an induction, you make sure you know how to muster, you know where your T cards, which is your identification for yourself, that they're put in the right places. So it's safety, 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 safety. And it's not just your safety. You want to make sure that, your safety is because you want everybody to be safe. So if you're on your A game and everybody else is on their A game, when something does go wrong, you know exactly how to respond, whether it's a helicopter incident, whether it's the incident from landing a helicopter. I mean, all of that stuff's got safety pretty well much embedded into it. So you get on board, you do your induction, and shipping, when you're on a ship, or on an offshore rig, it's tight quarters. So, you're going to share a cabin with somebody. So you unpack, you know where your safety gear is in the cabin. You put your overalls on, you put your steel caps on, and then you go down into the control room and you catch up on what's gone on. The next morning starts at 5:45, and this is my favorite part of the day. By far it is. So the 5:45 is a toolbox meeting. And in the toolbox meeting, you get to talk about what's going to happen for the day, what permits have been released, who's going to do what. But it's my favorite part of the day because you get to talk about personal safety. And it's literally that moment of the day where you get to tell each other why you care about each other and why you want that day to go safely. So quite often there's a safety moment. Quite often, you know, if everyone's a little bit quiet, a little bit tired, I'm a morning person. So the couple of us that are really bright and really energetic will share a safety moment, and it really lifts that whole team spirit up. You really get to show each other again how much you care about each other and how much you want everybody in the galley for dinner that night. So yeah, that's how it starts. The permit process itself is really, really important. You get to talk about that last minute risk assessment that you'll do when you're out on deck. I'll say to anybody that's new and hasn't experienced that, tie up with the production superintendent, follow the mechanic around, hold the bucket, follow somebody around a bit like a puppy dog, but at least you'll learn under a great safe environment, you know, where to be, what to do, and you're helping somebody out. Take it all in, be like a sponge, learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine, given that certainly offshore is still, even with all the safety stuff that we have, still one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. So that kind of family camaraderie environment is something that's very difficult to find in any other kind of job, certainly.
Right. It's super important. Yeah. It's super important. I wish everybody could get to see the challenges of making energy. It isn't the easiest of things to do. And, you know, the utmost respect I have is for the men and women that work offshore, because you do realize, especially if you've been out there for years of your life, how mistakes can happen, how there is still human errors. And then you're also looking at the fact it's machines. You know, machines will trip you up from time to time. You know, you take that breath and then you work as a team to get it back online. And it isn't always, you know, fun and exciting. This can be the challenge of the day, but it's that team spirit that gets it back online. And you're always thinking about each other's safety, always. So you do become a very tight-knit team for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's really good information again. And I think that's, you know, a really good insight into the day-to-day life. And obviously you've got, you know, the camaraderie of the team and how the team support you. So that kind of leads me a little bit into my next question of how your career developed to where you got up to as Principal of Instrumentation, and the kind of network of support and opportunities that you had for training and development. How did that come about?
So number one, if you'd asked me all those years ago, if that would have been how I would have ended up in my career, coming from Western Australia, ending up in corporate America, you know, with an amazing, actually humble experience of being able to be the principal of automation, alarm management for all the deep water assets upstream, I would have said that's absurd. You know, how could I have got that far? And when I think about, you know, what led me on that way, I think of it more, for me, it was the people that I was surrounded by. I had some great leadership when I got to Russia and met the ExxonMobil team. The Cheryl Gomez's, the Brian Wesleys, the Jim Taylors, they were all extremely high up their leaders. But what they showed me was the capability of being able to act with courage of conviction, the capability that everybody has to stop the job, the capability to believe in yourself, because when you believe in yourself, the rest of the team does as well. And what happened to me was that great support system, those great leaders, eventually took me to Houston, Texas, and I became the facility owner of the network of alarm management. And I realized early on in my career how important alarm management was to day-to-day operations. I realized that poor alarm management had led to significant incidents, the BP Texas City incident, Deepwater Horizon. In fact, a plethora of major incidents could have been prevented by good alarm management, and it wasn't. Longford was another one, the one in Australia. So there was this pattern emerging where poor alarm management was an indicator, in fact, a key contributor to actually hurting people, losing lives. And so when that opportunity came along to become the facilitator of the network, which was 74 assets, 14 business units, I jumped at it because I realized I had this great gift given to me that I could save lives. I could prevent equipment damage. I could prevent emissions. And it was a big one that was given to me. So over the next 5 years, I threw myself into it. I was really lucky enough to be named Trainer of the Year. This was something that I was so passionate about because I realized, again, in my heart, how important this part of the business is. And to this day, when people say alarm management, my eyes spring up, my ears prick up. So it was that opportunity very early on that I did really well at, simply because I knew it was something that I could absolutely help people with. And from there, it took off. So I became, really well known within the company itself. I had the opportunity to help develop some of the industry standards that we still use right now, the IEC standards, and just meet teams of people that could relate to why I was so passionate about this particular area. So that's kind of how it led to there. I'll say it was a journey. I didn't think it was ever going to end up leading there. But what was interesting in my retirement, which happened in May, some of my friends came over from Australia. The people I was just talking about were there. They came up to me and said, "We knew this was going to happen for you. You just didn't know it yourself." So it's a nice surprise to end up, the last 5 or 6 years of my career being a principal, certainly being a woman, huge. But like I said, coming from that background of Western Australia, a very isolated part of the world, who would have thought? But I guess the key takeaways there is if you're given an opportunity like that, tie it into why it means something to you. How can you produce energy safely? Because that's the mantra. If you can make a drop of oil safely when nobody gets hurt, you've done it.
Yeah.
That's the key. So I really gravitated towards that.
A lot of that will also be, certainly in terms of having the passion for it, is coming from that background of working with these people. So when you're thinking about training as a passion, you've always got back in the mind that experience you had. So you see, you can physically see in your mind the people you're protecting through this work. So it becomes quite personal in a way as well, I suppose.
It really does. And I used to do this a lot with the project teams that really didn't have the opportunity to go offshore. So when I did the training for it, or when I was leading a HAZOP, facilitating a HAZOP or the alarm management piece, I used to always say to people, look, if you're struggling to picture why this is important, please picture me in a set of overalls, in an offshore control room or out on deck, dealing with what you've given us. So every small change you're doing in that project phase, every document that you're writing, please understand that it could impact me one of these days. And if that helps you gravitate towards making it personal, make it personal. Because you might get to that stage where you're sitting in an office, you're creating documents, you're creating an alarm management rationalization document, or you're creating a safety system document. If you can't tie it into physically what you've decided might hurt someone, think of that someone as me. Because I'm the girl that might be offshore that could be impacted by this, that might not go home.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people gravitated towards that.
Yeah. And that's obviously helped quite a lot as well.
You have to put a face behind those people that didn't make it, right? Or that were impacted, or that you might not know because they're offshore and you're in an office. So you really need to get that connection going. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's really interesting. This industry, it's a really interesting one. I think what I've seen in the last 20 years, and it's because of the internet, and it's because maybe of the sensationalism of the incidents that have happened have turned into movies. I don't care what it is that makes it real or makes it more known. Because I think the world should know what it takes to create energy. it's a tough day-to-day job. It's not easy. And, you know, people are at risk, and you are putting your hands to a very capable operations team, but that operations team has to deal with what they've been given. So having that visual connection, again, this is where the remote control rooms came in huge benefit, was that the engineers could actually visually see what was going on, what the end result was that they had designed. I mean, that in itself is phenomenal. So anytime you can join those dots and make it real for people, it's really, really important, because that is the difference between people going home and not going home.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I think really good points about safety as well.
Yeah.
And what we did touch on there a little bit was just around your kind of making it personal and talking about kind of your experience as a woman in the industry as well, which I think is also a really big talking point, because I think, or certainly what we have seen, is one of the biggest questions from graduates and people considering the industry is there's a lot of preconception about the energy industry in general and engineering about women in the industry, which we would like to obviously demystify and debunk. So just from your perspective through your career, what was kind of, how has DEI affected your career? You know, what's been your experiences personally through the industry?
So 30 plus years ago, the acronym DEI didn't exist. In my world, going to work overseas, you know, there wasn't female accommodation, there wasn't female bathrooms. So this was wholly and solely down to the team that made me comfortable. And my hat's off to those, you know, gentlemen that watched me come on board, obviously the odd one out, although I didn't really recognize it, and made me feel as comfortable as anybody else. I think pretty early on in my career, those same people, you know, they had daughters, they had mothers, they had sisters, and they realized it was a challenge for me. So I think they went overboard really to make sure I wasn't feeling in any way odd. And they really did. So I'll say that back then, it was a challenge. It certainly isn't a challenge now, 30 plus years later, where you've got that, at least the ability to have all the, you know, accommodations and everything you need to be happy offshore, that's for sure. And people now are expecting it. I always saw it as a strength. What I realized early on too is that the power that you can have being a woman, even in the toolbox talks, you bring a different mindset. You do think differently. And that's a gift. If we all think the same, we might miss out on the next big idea. We might not see what's coming from a safety perspective. So I always saw being a woman as a real gift to me. It made me work harder, that's for sure. And I think everyone recognized, especially when I was offshore, that I was trying harder because I really valued the opportunity I was given. I felt like at the very beginning that I was putting other people out. So I did try harder. And then I saw the whole industry change. But I'll say your superpower is actually being a woman, is that you're, and it's not just being a woman. If you're from a different culture, if you're from a different background, think of that as a strength. When I was in Houston campus, I was given the role of the production company inclusion diversity ambassador. I started looking at the incidents in industry where inclusion and diversity could have saved the day. There's one in particular that really resonates with me, the Korean airline incident that killed 500 plus people on an airline. The crew thought that they didn't have the authority to correct the captain. It was a cultural thing. Unfortunately, that ended up with a whole load of incidents that wasn't good. And when they did the deep dive into it, they realized that cultural ability to not be able to stop the job and speak up was their downfall. So you have all these safety incidents tied into inclusion and diversity. And again, what you realize is it's the power of being different that's a power. You know, it might save somebody's life. I'll tell you now, it definitely will bring a new idea to the table. So I've always thought that, you know, the diversity is the key. The diversity is the different ingredients, you know. The inclusion is how you get that recipe to work together. And that is giving people the ability to feel brave enough to say something. But definitely different cultures, different genders, different ages. I mean, it's got to be the mix, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen different companies take that so much to heart, and watching it work and watching it get better and better and better. So I'd say to any female or anybody that thinks they're perhaps not like everybody else, it's your strength. It's your gift. People appreciate it, and people do appreciate people that stand up and say something. And if you're ever in a situation where you're seeing other people not feel comfortable to stand up and say something, you know, have that leadership quality and say, well, what is it that you think, you know? Tell me what you think. Tell me what your opinion is. Should we be doing something differently?
Yeah, and it comes back, I think, to what you were saying earlier on about how life and how teams work on an FPSO, that you have this dynamic where everyone is ultimately responsible for the safety and the safety of everyone else on board. So you have that family feeling. So there's much more inclusion there because you need it there effectively.
Yeah. There's a great poem you'll see on a lot of offshore facilities that a lot of companies really gravitate towards, and it's My Brother's Sister's Keeper. And it's a great poem. It's a poem about how each of us really has the opportunity to look after each other. And so you treat each other like a brother and like a sister. And I've seen it on 100 different FPSOs, different companies, but I've seen that same poem printed on the wall in different parts of the world. It's a great poem. Because you are the keeper of your brother, right? Yeah. What you choose to do, or your sister, what you choose to do on that day can make the difference of somebody going home to their family or not. And again, I don't take that lightly. So that opportunity, if you are different, to bring that mindset, again, it's your superpower, it's your gift, and it'll always get recognized like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's great. And then looking a bit more broadly at kind of how the industry changed a little bit, especially during COVID. What was kind of your experiences of the industry and sort of the ESG goals and stuff that were during there?
Yeah, COVID was a tough one. So I found myself down in Guyana, the flagship ExxonMobil business unit, and we'd had our first FPSO arrive. That was a challenging startup, and then COVID hit. I want to say, embarrassingly, at one point, I was holding the record within our company anyway for the number of quarantines. And let me just walk through the quarantines. I know a lot of people had it way tougher than what I'm about to describe, but it was pretty tough for us. So the quarantines ranged for me from 14 days to 21 days, you know, locked in a room. When I did the 21-day one in Singapore with my asset manager, it was the card taken off as you literally didn't see each other or another person for 21 days. All for all the right reasons. And then the ones in Guyana and the ones in Houston, a lot of testing. Obviously, the safety of the people offshore and the facilities was first and foremost, and that's why we were doing this. Then you'd get on board. The sad part for me, I think, there was a huge mental part to that. Being locked in a room and being isolated like that was bad enough as it was. But then going offshore and realizing that, you know, we had a tricky startup to get through. We weren't really sure. We weren't sure what was happening in the rest of the world. We knew we couldn't leave the country. The airports were closed. So we were in a foreign country, out in the middle of the ocean, trying to do a challenging startup with the people we had. We couldn't bring people in. Again, the airports were closed. So that expertise coming in was very difficult to do. I'll tell you, I spent some time offshore with people that spent 120, 140 days offshore. That's a lot of time to do 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, not knowing what was going on in the rest of the world. And some of my work colleagues lost family during that time, couldn't leave. So I'll tell you that for all the right reasons, everybody in the world has a different story, and it was, none of it's good. There is a positive to it that I think we all learned how to appreciate life a lot more. I think we all learned how to appreciate each other a lot more. And there's nothing you wouldn't do for each other, especially that team that I was with down in Guyana. any one of those people could pick up the phone tomorrow and ask me for help, and I'd be right there. I don't think I expected that as an outcome of COVID, but it's an outcome of COVID for us. But just the effort people put in and still did a good job. There's another story I'll tell you, that as the vaccines came to be available, the CEO and the operations manager of SBM came all the way down to Guyana and came offshore with us for a couple of weeks. The first, it's a CFO and a production operations manager from the Netherlands. That high level of leadership to make a presence all the way down to Guyana to an FPSO to come out and basically talk about the challenges, but how they were willing to actually go through that whole effort of coming all the way down there, putting themselves even in an exposed environment to actually come out to make sure we were okay. That was what I would say was an exemplary example of great leadership. What that meant to the crew was enormous. Enormous. So if you're ever in an opportunity where, in Lean we call it going to Gemba, if ever you're in an opportunity to actually go to Gemba, go to the place where the work's actually done, the power of just turning up is incredible. And that was so powerful to that facility. And those two leaders, literally, if they picked the phone up and asked me to go anywhere, I'd say, sure, I'll be there tomorrow. That was a great example of leadership to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge.
A testament to reacting to COVID in the best possible way.
Well, it wasn't just for a weekend. They stayed out there for a good 2 weeks with us. Had dinner with us every day, at the toolbox every day, in the overalls, came out on deck with us every day. It wasn't a quick flight. It was, they came and lived with us. And they didn't have to, but that was pretty important to us.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of leadership, is actually being involved, very hands-on, not necessarily
Present.
Operating the machines, but within the team. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it was, like I said, it was bad enough as it was with what happened with COVID, but to have people make the effort like that was huge to the team, huge.
This has been Engineering Pro. In part 2, we'll find out more about some of the industry-defining changes in the oil and gas industry, Jayne's advice to talented individuals looking to enter the industry, and more of her own story and goals since returning to work. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about starting or advancing your career in this field, please visit our website at www.nesfurcroft.com. There you can find new job openings, register your details, and access more helpful content about our sectors and the opportunities they offer. Don't forget to subscribe to see the second part of our podcast episode with Jayne. Thanks for watching and listening.